Picture a PhD student sitting in his university office, writing academic papers on how serial killers choose their victims. He studies predatory behavior. He reads case files on the world's most dangerous killers. He emails police departments across the country, volunteering to help them understand how criminals think. And then, when no one is watching, he drives 3 hours to a quiet college town, walks into a house full of sleeping students, and kills 4 of them. The degree he was working on while all of this was happening, a PhD in criminology. True crime, dark stories, and the kind of cases that keep you up at night, all things I'm mildly obsessed with. And based on the fact that you're still here, so are you. And if you're new here, we drop a new case every other day. Real stories, real investigations, no fluff. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. It takes 2 seconds and it means everything to a small channel like this. Okay, let's get into this. Bryan Christopher Kohberger was born on November 21st, 1988 in Effort, Pennsylvania. A small, tight-knit working-class town in Monroe County. The kind of place where the winters are long, the community is close, and the most exciting thing to happen in a given week is the local football game. By most accounts, Bryan had a genuinely difficult childhood. He was overweight as a kid. He was bullied, not just occasionally, but consistently. The kind of bullying that follows a child through the hallways for years and leaves marks that don't show on the outside. Former classmates described him as withdrawn, intense, and deeply uncomfortable in social situations. Someone who wanted connection but could never quite land it the way other kids seemed to without effort. His teenage years were rough in a different way. Kohberger struggled with a drug addiction, opioids, substances that were tearing through small-town Pennsylvania communities during that era with a quiet, devastating force. But somewhere in his early 20s, he pulled himself out of it. He cleaned up, he refocused, and he threw himself entirely, obsessively, into academics. The subject that consumed him was not chemistry, not law, not engineering. It was criminal behavior, the psychology of violence, the minds of people who hurt other people. Bryan Kohberger became fascinated. Not casually curious, but genuinely deeply fascinated by why killers do what they do and how they think before, during, and after they do it. He enrolled at DeSales University in Center Valley, Pennsylvania, where he studied psychology. He was considered a strong student, focused, driven, clearly intelligent. After his undergraduate degree, he went on to pursue a master's degree in criminal justice. And at every stage of his academic career, the same thread ran through all of his work: predatory behavior, criminal decision-making, and the psychology of violence. But what makes this case uniquely disturbing, beyond the murders themselves, is what Kohberger did with that academic interest. He didn't just read textbooks, he actively reached out. He emailed law enforcement agencies across the country, introducing himself as a researcher, offering to help them better understand how criminal minds work. He sent surveys to convicted felons, people already behind bars for violent crimes, asking them to describe their thought processes, how they chose their victims, how they managed risk, how they stayed calm. He was building a comprehensive academic picture of what makes a predator operate effectively. Read that back slowly if you need to. He was interviewing killers, writing papers on how killers think, designing academic frameworks for understanding violent predatory behavior. And all of that work, all of that research, was being done by the same man who would one day use that exact knowledge to plan, execute, and nearly get away with 4 murders. By the fall of 2022, Bryan Kohberger was 33 years old, freshly enrolled in a PhD program in criminology at Washington State University in Pullman, Washington. WSU's Criminal Justice Department had a strong national reputation. Kohberger was a teaching assistant, helping undergraduate students understand the very concepts he had spent years studying. His professors and fellow graduate students described him as dedicated, engaged, and unusually passionate about the material. Pullman, Washington sits 8 miles from Moscow, Idaho. These 2 towns are essentially one community split by a state line. Washington State University in Pullman and the University of Idaho in Moscow are neighboring campuses. Their students share bars, restaurants, parties, social circles. People from both towns move between them so constantly that the state line is barely a concept in daily life. You can drive from one downtown to the other in under 15 minutes. And in the weeks and months leading up to November 2022, Bryan Kohberger was making that drive, repeatedly. Not to restaurants, not to visit friends. Investigators would later discover through cell phone data that his device had been detected in the vicinity of a specific house on King Road in Moscow at least 12 separate times before November 13th. 12 times. He drove past it. He parked nearby. He sat in the dark and watched. Now let me tell you about who lived at 1122 King Road. The house was a 3-story off-campus rental property just a short walk from the University of Idaho. It was split level, a little worn around the edges the way most student rentals are, with a sliding glass door in the back that didn't lock as securely as it should have. 6 women rented it together. Among them were 4 friends, 2 pairs of best friends, who had grown close during their time at the university, and whose lives were about to be taken in the most senseless, devastating way possible. Kaylee Goncalves was 21 years old. She was from Rathdrum, Idaho, a small town about an hour away. By every account, Kaylee was warm, funny, fiercely loyal, and absolutely magnetic. The kind of person who made friends effortlessly and kept them for life. She was in her senior year, close to graduating. With plans for the future she talked about openly. Her best friend in the world was Madison Mogen. Madison Mogen was also 21, from Sandpoint, Idaho. She and Kaylee had been inseparable since they'd met. The kind of friendship people write about. The kind where you don't need to explain yourself because the other person already knows. They lived together, went out together, planned their futures together. They had matching friendship tattoos. On the second floor of the house lived Xana Kernodle, 20 years old, from Post Falls, Idaho. Xana was studying marketing, known among her friends for her energy, her laugh, and the way she showed up for the people she cared about. That night, her boyfriend Ethan Chapin was staying over. Ethan was 20 years old, from Conway, Washington. A triplet, with a twin brother and a sister still living. He played in the Greek system, was liked by nearly everyone who met him, and was the kind of young man his family described as their light. His 2 siblings, his brother and sister, would receive the call that Sunday morning that their third had been taken from them in the middle of the night. The other 2 women who lived in the house, Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk, were also home that night, asleep in their rooms on the main floor. Both survived. What Dylan Mortensen experienced in the early hours of November 13th, what she heard, what she saw, and what she was forced to carry afterward, is something that no person should ever have to hold. Saturday, November 12th, started the way most weekends start on a college campus near the end of a semester. Parties, gatherings, people blowing off steam before the pressure of finals settled in. Kaylee and Madison spent the evening out. They attended a fraternity event, moved on to a local bar, and ended the night at a late-night food truck near campus called the Corner Club. A grainy outdoor surveillance camera caught them there at 1:45 in the morning, standing in line, laughing, talking, alive. They returned to the King Road house just before 2 a.m. Ethan and Xana had already come home earlier and were upstairs. Dylan and Bethany were in their rooms on the main floor. By around 2 a.m., the house was quiet. The lights went off. Everyone settled in for the night. Somewhere between 4 a.m. and 4:17 a.m., Bryan Kohberger entered that house. He came in through the sliding back door. He was dressed in black. He wore a mask and tactical gloves. He moved through the ground floor quietly, in the dark, past the rooms where Dylan and Bethany were sleeping. He went upstairs. What followed, investigators believe happened in under 15 minutes. Ethan Chapin and Xana Kernodle on the second floor. Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen on the third. All 4 of them were stabbed with a fixed-blade tactical knife, a K-bar TDI, a military-style weapon with a blade specifically designed for close-quarters use. The medical examiner's findings indicated they were attacked while they slept, or close to it. There was no sign of struggle that suggested they had significant time to react. At some point during those 15 minutes, Dylan Mortensen opened her bedroom door. She had heard something, a sound that registered somewhere between a dream and reality, a cry, a thud, something that wasn't right. She stepped into the hallway, and she saw him. A figure in black, masked, standing just feet away from her in the dark. She later described his eyes as being fixed on her, calm. He walked past her, down the stairs, out the back door. Gone. Dylan went back to her room, locked the door, and didn't call 911. Investigators and psychologists who reviewed the case believe she was in a state of acute dissociative shock. Her brain, overwhelmed by what she had witnessed, went into a kind of protective shutdown, a freeze response so complete that she may have genuinely not processed what she had seen as real. She wasn't uncooperative. She wasn't indifferent. Her mind simply had no framework for what had just happened inside her home. Around noon that Sunday, friends came to the house. They had been texting all morning and getting nothing back. Something felt wrong. They knocked on the door, tried the door, got inside, and they found all 4 of them, Ethan, Xana, Madison, Kaylee. The 911 call came in at 11:58 a.m. Moscow, Idaho has a population of around 25,000 people. It is, by almost any measure, one of the safest small college towns in the American Northwest. The idea of a quadruple homicide, 4 young people stabbed in their beds with no weapon, no clear motive, and no suspect, was so far outside the frame of daily life in Moscow that people genuinely struggled to process it as real. Parents started driving to the university to bring their children home. Students stopped walking anywhere alone. Campus security was overwhelmed with calls. People who had never owned a security camera ordered one overnight. Moscow PD, a small department not built or staffed for a case of this scale, found themselves at the center of the most significant murder investigation in Idaho's modern history. They brought in state resources. The FBI joined the investigation. A tip line was established, and within days, they had thousands of tips. Phone calls, emails, social media messages, people pointing fingers in every direction imaginable. All of it had to be processed. All of it had to be chased down. Almost all of it led nowhere, because the scene had yielded almost nothing useful in terms of immediate physical evidence. No murder weapon, no reliable eyewitness description, no obvious forensic trail. The attacker had worn gloves, had worn black clothing, had moved efficiently through the house without leaving behind the kind of messy, obvious forensic signature that TV crime dramas train people to expect. He knew what he was doing. He had studied this. The only physical evidence left at the scene, the only thing standing between justice and the void, was a single leather knife sheath. A K-bar TDI tactical knife sheath, found on the bed underneath the body of Kaylee Goncalves. Black leather, approximately 5 inches long, with a small snap button closure at the top to hold the blade in place. The sheath had apparently come loose from the knife during the attack, or been set down and forgotten in the chaos of the moment. And on the snap of that sheath, forensic technicians found it. Touch DNA, a microscopic trace of biological material left behind when someone handled the sheath with their bare fingers. The killer's DNA. A PhD criminology student who had written academic papers about how killers get caught had left his DNA at the scene, and that's where the whole story cracks open. The DNA profile was run through CODIS, the National Criminal DNA Database that holds profiles from millions of convicted offenders and arrestees across the United States. No match. The owner of that DNA had never been arrested, never been in the system. Dead end, at least by conventional means. Investigators made a decision that would ultimately break the entire case. They uploaded the unknown DNA profile to a public genealogy database, the same investigative genetic genealogy technique used to identify the Golden State Killer, Joseph James DeAngelo, in 2018 after more than 40 years of cold case frustration. In genealogy DNA matching, you're not looking for a direct hit. You're looking for partial matches, distant relatives, third and fourth cousins who share segments of DNA with your unknown subject. From those partial matches, investigators build a family tree, a wide, sprawling family tree that they then narrow down, branch by branch, generation by generation, until the branches converge on one individual. It is painstaking work, methodical, quiet. While the public was screaming for answers and amateur detectives on Reddit were accusing innocent people daily, a small team of investigators was building a family tree in silence. There was also a second thread developing simultaneously. A neighbor near the King Road house had a security camera installed on their property, and on the footage from the early hours of November 13th, a white vehicle was captured. A white Hyundai Elantra, driving slowly past the house, circling, coming back. The footage was dark, grainy, and shot at distance, the kind of image that's just barely useful, but it was something. Law enforcement issued a public bulletin requesting information about any white Hyundai Elantra in Moscow on the night of the murders. Tips flooded in. For weeks, nothing decisive came back. Now, I have to stop here for a moment, because I want to know what you're thinking right now. Because here's the detail that I genuinely cannot wrap my head around. This man spent years studying how killers get caught. He wrote papers on forensic evidence. He interviewed convicted criminals about their mistakes. He understood touch DNA, digital footprints, and surveillance systems academically, in ways most people never would. And he left his DNA on a knife sheath, at the scene, under the body. Drop your reaction in the comments right now, because I need to know if anyone else finds that as staggering as I do. I'll be reading every single one. The genealogy DNA results came back and pointed investigators toward a family in Pennsylvania. They began working through the family tree. Names, ages, locations, cross-references, ruling people out, narrowing the field. And eventually, the branches converged on a 33-year-old graduate student at Washington State University in Pullman, Washington, 8 miles from Moscow, 8 miles from 1122 King Road, Bryan Christopher Kohberger. Investigators pulled his records. His vehicle registration showed a white Hyundai Elantra, the same make, model, and color as the car on the surveillance footage. They pulled his social media. They pulled his academic profile. And then they found something else. Instagram direct messages, sent from Kohberger's account to Kaylee Goncalves. Multiple messages sent in the months before November 13th. She had never responded. Whether this rejection factored into what happened, whether it was a trigger, or completely unrelated, investigators took careful, detailed note of it. A surveillance operation was quietly set up around Kohberger. Investigators needed to obtain a direct DNA sample to confirm the genealogy match before they could move, and they needed to do it without alerting him. In late December 2022, Kohberger and his father Paul loaded up the white Hyundai Elantra and began the long cross-country drive from Pullman, Washington, to their family home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, heading home for the holidays, while investigators tracked their route the entire way. While Kohberger was in Pennsylvania, surveillance teams obtained a DNA sample from trash bags that had been left outside the Kohberger family residence. The sample was processed and compared against the DNA profile extracted from the knife sheath snap. It was a match. On December 30th, 2022, exactly 7 weeks after 4 University of Idaho students were stabbed in their beds, Bryan Christopher Kohberger was arrested at his parents' home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania by Pennsylvania State Police and FBI tactical units in the early morning hours. He was calm. He did not resist. He was taken into custody without incident. He was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, 1 for each life he had taken, and 1 count of felony burglary for unlawfully entering the residence with the intent to commit a crime. All 5 charges were filed in Latah County, Idaho. If convicted of first-degree murder in Idaho, Bryan Kohberger faces the death penalty. His extradition to Idaho took place in January 2023. When the transport plane carrying him landed at the Pullman-Moscow Regional Airport, people had gathered outside. Students, parents, Moscow residents, people who had spent 7 weeks in a state of raw fear and grief, and who now stood in the cold watching a van carry the man allegedly responsible for it. It wasn't relief exactly. Relief implies the wound is closed. This was something else. The beginning of a long, grinding process towards something that might, eventually, feel like justice. As investigators dug deeper into Kohberger's digital life and physical environment, the picture that emerged was consistent with someone who had spent considerable time planning what he did. His cell phone data was among the most significant evidence in the case. The data placed his device in proximity to 1122 King Road at least 12 separate times in the weeks and months preceding November 13th. 12 visits, different days, different times, building a picture of the house, its occupants, their schedules, their patterns. His behavior in the days immediately following the murders also drew attention. Multiple witnesses, neighbors in his apartment complex in Pullman, reported seeing Kohberger cleaning his white Hyundai Elantra at unusual hours. Late at night, early in the morning, scrubbing, vacuuming, repeating the process with an intensity that struck people as far beyond normal. He also appeared to have attempted to clean certain surfaces in his apartment multiple times in the days after the killings. He knew exactly what he was trying to remove, and he knew why. There was one additional piece of forensic evidence that prosecutors pointed to: a latent fingerprint found inside the King Road house, in a location consistent with someone having made their way through the residence. When combined with the DNA, the cell data, the surveillance footage, and the documented prior visits to the property, the prosecution's evidentiary picture was, by most assessments, deeply substantial. In July 2023, Kohberger's defense team filed his formal alibi with the court. His claim? He had been out driving alone that night. He often took late-night drives by himself. He had no one to confirm his whereabouts. The problem with this alibi, beyond its inherent weakness, was that the cell phone data showed a gap. A window of time on the night of November 12th to 13th, during which Kohberger's device went effectively dark. No location pings. No data activity. The phone went quiet precisely during the period in which 4 people were killed at 1122 King Road. That is not easy to explain away. In October 2023, a significant development briefly shifted the course of the case. Kohberger's defense attorneys communicated a willingness to explore a guilty plea, life in prison without the possibility of parole, in exchange for the prosecution taking the death penalty off the table. The families of the victims were not unified in their response. Some wanted him to stand trial, to face a courtroom, to face the evidence, to face the families of the people he had killed. Some were exhausted by the idea of a prolonged trial and the re-traumatization that comes with it. In the end, the plea went nowhere. The case moved forward toward trial. Bryan Kohberger has entered a plea of not guilty to all 5 charges. His trial, after multiple delays, is set to proceed in 2025. It is expected to be one of the most closely watched criminal trials in recent American history. The families of Chapin, Xana Kernodle, Madison Mogen, and Kaylee Goncalves have spent more than 2 years navigating something no family should ever have to navigate. Stacy Chapin, Ethan's mother, has spoken publicly and with extraordinary grace about how the loss of her son reshaped everything: their family, their daily life, the way time itself feels. Kaylee's family has been vocal, fierce, and relentless in refusing to let the case disappear from public consciousness. Madison's family. Xana's family. 4 families. 4 sets of parents and siblings who went to sleep one night with their child alive and woke up to a phone call that remade the world. Meanwhile, Bryan Kohberger sits in a holding facility in Latah County, Idaho. A criminology PhD student who spent years studying how killers are caught, who interviewed convicted felons about their mistakes, who wrote academic papers about predatory behavior and forensic evidence, and the ways investigators build cases against people who think they are untouchable. And he left a knife sheath, with his DNA on the snap, under the body of a 21-year-old woman from Rathdrum, Idaho, who had 3 semesters left until graduation. Like it was waiting to be found. Kaylee Goncalves was 21. Madison Mogen was 21. Xana Kernodle was 20. Ethan Chapin was 20. They deserve to graduate. They deserve to grow old. They deserve to come home. And the man who took that from them studied for years to understand exactly what he was doing, and did it anyway. True crime, dark stories, and the kind of cases that keep you up at night, all things I'm mildly obsessed with. And based on the fact that you're still here, so are you. If this case stayed with you, subscribe. We drop a new case every other day. New story, new investigation, same obsession. I'll see you in the next one.